would climb to 23 across four, would climb to 23 across four counties. But in a narrow coulee 3 miles west of Medora, smoke rose from a stovepipe jutting through the roof of an abandoned railroad boxcar. Inside that metal shell, two orphaned children sat in shirt sleeves, warming their hands around cups of willow bark tea while the world outside froze solid. Cornelius Whitmore had given them until Christmas. He had wagered $5 with Silas Braddock at the general store that the Soonberg children would not survive their first Dakota winter. He had called their shelter a coffin. He had called their design foolishness. He had laughed when he rode past their coulee in October, watching the boy drag cottonwood poles up from the river bottom. On the night of January 9th, Cornelius Whitmore was not laughing. He was stumbling through waist-deep snow toward that same coulee, his fingers blackening with frostbite, his lungs burning with each frozen breath. Desperate to reach the metal box he had mocked for 5 months, he would pound on that door at 3 in the morning. He would beg to be let inside. And when the door opened and the warmth hit his face like a physical embrace, he would understand that everything he thought he knew about survival was wrong. But that night was still 5 months away. This story begins in August, when the summer grass was still green, and two children stood at the edge of the only home they had ever known, watching a stranger claim it as his own. The wagon arrived on August 4th, 1886. Leif Sundberg saw the dust cloud first, rising above the prairie like a brown smudge against the pale morning sky. He set down the hoe he had been using to clear weeds from his mother's grave and watched the wagon approach. Beside him, his younger sister Anakin stopped pulling dandelions and shielded her eyes against the sun. They were not entirely alone. Fenrir had been with them since their father found him as a pup, abandoned in a snowdrift 3 winters ago. The wolf dog was gray as storm clouds, with yellow eyes that seemed to see through lies and pretense. He had refused to leave the children's side since the day they buried their father, sleeping across the doorway each night as if guarding them from whatever darkness might come. Now as the wagon approached, Fenrir rose to his feet. A low growl rumbled in his chest. His hackles lifted along his spine. "Easy, boy," Leif murmured, though he felt the same unease the dog sensed. They had been orphans for 3 months. Their father had drowned in the spring flood that took their stepmother with him, swept away when the creek behind the homestead swelled beyond its banks and collapsed the root cellar where they had sought shelter from the storm. Leif had pulled his father's body from the mud 2 days later, a mile downstream. His stepmother was never found. Since then, the children had survived alone. Leif was 19, old enough to file a homestead claim in his own name, old enough to be considered a man by the standards of the territory. Anakin was 15, old enough to cook and clean and tend the chickens, and he old enough to understand that their situation was precarious, but not old enough to do anything about it. They had planted a small garden. They had preserved what they could from the root cellar that survived. They had written a letter to their father's brother-in-law in Minnesota, informing him of the deaths and asking for guidance. They had received no reply. Now watching the wagon approach with Fenrir growling at their side, Leif felt something cold settle in his chest. The feeling had nothing to do with the weather. The man who climbed down from the wagon was Marcus Harlow. He was their stepmother's younger brother, a man Leif had met only twice in his life. Both meetings had left him uneasy. Marcus had small eyes that never seemed to blink and a smile that showed too many teeth. He was smiling now. "Leif," Marcus said, extending his hand, "and little Annie, my condolences on your loss. My sister was a good woman." Fenrir's growl deepened. Leif did not take the offered hand. Anakin stepped closer to her brother, her shoulder pressing against his arm. "What brings you here, Mr. Harlow?" Marcus let his hand drop without offense. His smile did not waver. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document, which he handed to Leif with the casual confidence of a man who knew he held all the cards. "Your father owed me money," Marcus said. $300 borrowed 2 years ago to buy that plow and those draft horses. He signed a note. I've come to collect. Leaf unfolded the document. The handwriting was not his father's. The signature at the bottom might have been, or might have been a clever forgery. Leaf had no way to know for certain. Yeah, my father never mentioned any debt. Men don't always tell their children about their financial troubles. Marcus's smile widened. The note is due upon death. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but business is business. You have 3 days to pay the debt or vacate the property. We don't have $300. I know. Marcus looked past Leaf toward the homestead. His eyes moved over the cabin, the barn, the chicken coop, the small garden struggling against the prairie wind. Which is why I'm prepared to be generous. Sign the property over to me, and I'll forgive the debt entirely. You can take whatever you can carry. I'll even give you a ride to Dickinson, where the church ladies can help you find placement. Leaf felt Anakin's grip tighten on his arm. He thought about the church homes in Dickinson. When he had heard stories, girls went in and rarely came out. Boys were sent to work farms for no pay, sleeping in barns, eating scraps. The church called it charity. Everyone else called it what it was. No, Leaf said. Marcus's smile flickered. Excuse me? We're not signing anything. We're not leaving. This is our home. For a long moment, Marcus simply stared at him. Fenrir continued to growl, his body tense, ready to spring. Then the smile returned, but it was different now. Colder. The mask had slipped just enough to show what lay beneath. Let me explain something to you, boy. Marcus stepped closer, and Leif caught a whiff of tobacco and something sour. I have a legal document. I have witnesses who will swear they saw your father sign it. I have a lawyer in Dickinson who will file a claim against this property by the end of the week. Well, you can fight me in court if you want, but you don't have money for a lawyer, and by the time any judge hears your case, Winter will have done my work for me. He turned his gaze to Anakin. Something in his eyes made Leif's stomach clench. Besides, Marcus continued, his voice dropping, there are other options for the girl. The Hendricks family has a son who needs a wife. Good family, wealthy. They've already expressed interest. If you sign over the property and let me arrange the marriage, I'll give you $20 and forget this whole unpleasantness. Leif stepped between Marcus and his sister. Fenrir moved with him, positioning himself at Leif's side, his yellow eyes fixed on the stranger. Get off our land? Marcus laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Your land? You're a 19-year-old orphan with no money, no connections, and no future. Your mother died giving birth to you. Your stepmother wanted to send you to an orphanage from the day she married your father. The only reason you're still here is because your father felt guilty about the circumstances of your birth. He leaned closer. Do you understand what I'm saying, boy? Nobody wants you. Nobody ever has. The kindest thing you could do for that girl is let me take her somewhere. She might actually have a chance. Behind Leif, Anakin made a small sound. He did not turn to look at her. He could not bear to see the expression on her face. 3 days, Marcus said, stepping back toward his wagon. Fenrir snapped at his heels and Marcus kicked at the dog, missing by inches. After that, I filed the claim and let the law sort it out. But I promise you this. If you're still here when the first snow falls, well, you'll both be dead by Christmas. And when they find what's left of you in the spring, I won't even pretend to mourn. He climbed into his wagon, flicked the reins, and drove away without looking back. Leif stood in the summer heat, watching the dust cloud recede, his hands still shaking at his sides. Fenrir pressed against his leg, whining softly. Leif. Anakin's voice was small. What he said about Mother, about her wanting to send you away. Is it true? He closed his eyes. He had known this moment would come eventually. He had hoped it would not come like this. Yes. The silence stretched between them. When Leif finally turned to face his sister, he saw something in her eyes that cut deeper than Marcus Harlow's threats. Doubt, uncertainty, the first cracks in the foundation of everything they had built together. "She never told me," Anakin whispered. "She wouldn't have. It was between her and Father. He refused. He said I was his son, no matter the circumstances of my birth, and no one would take me from him." Leif reached for his sister's hand. She did not pull away, but she did not squeeze back either. "Annie, I know this changes things, but you're still my sister. You're still my family. I made a promise to Father before he died. I promised I would protect you. I intend to keep that promise." "How?" Anakin looked at the homestead behind them. "How can you protect me when we have nothing? When that man is going to take everything?" "I don't know yet," Leif admitted, "but I'll figure it out. I always do." That night they packed what they could carry: clothes, tools, the little money they had saved. 43 cents in total. A Leif's hunting knife, the old blanket that had belonged to their father, and one more thing. A leather journal, worn soft with age, filled with cramped handwriting in a language Anakin could not read. "What is that?" she asked. Leif held the journal carefully, as if it were something precious. "It belonged to my grandfather, my mother's father. He was a builder in Norway, in a valley called Setesdal. He survived a winter that killed most of his village, a winter so cold that the livestock froze standing upright in the fields. He survived because he knew something the others didn't, something about how to build, how to trap heat, how to create warmth where there should be none." "I don't understand." "Neither do I. Not yet." Leif tucked the journal into his coat. "But I'm going to learn. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, I'm going to learn. And then I'm going to build something that will keep us alive." They left the homestead before dawn, Fenrir trotting ahead of them as if scouting the path. Behind them, their father's grave stood alone on the prairie, marked by a wooden cross that would not survive the coming winter. Anakin did not look back, but 3 miles from Medora, in a narrow coulee that cut down toward the Little Missouri River, Leif stopped walking. He stood at the rim of the draw, looking down at something half buried in debris from the spring floods. A Northern Pacific boxcar, derailed during the spring floods, abandoned where it had tipped. 34 feet of wood and metal that no one wanted. Fenrir scrambled down the slope, sniffing at the rusted metal, his tail wagging for the first time since they had left the homestead. "What is it?" Anakin asked. Leif smiled. It was the first time he had smiled since Marcus Harlow's wagon appeared on the horizon. "Home," he said. "It's going to be our home." Leif and Anakin have lost everything. Their home, their parents, their security. All they have left is each other, a loyal wolf dog named Fenrir, and an old journal filled with secrets from a country they have never seen. Would you trust your survival to words written by a grandfather you never met? Keep watching to see what Leif discovers in those pages. The boxcar lay on its side like a fallen giant, half buried in debris from the spring floods. Rust had begun its slow work on the metal sheathing, painting streaks of orange across the dark iron. The sliding door hung at an angle, wedged open by a fallen cottonwood branch. Leif climbed down into the coulee, now his boots sliding on loose scree. Anakin followed more carefully, one hand braced against the slope. Fenrir was already inside, his gray form visible through the gap in the door, sniffing at corners and marking territory. At the bottom, Anakin stopped and stared. "You want us to live in that?" The interior of the boxcar was dark and smelled of rust and old grain. The walls were wood planking over a metal frame, the exterior sheathed in iron to protect against weather. The sliding door still worked mostly. The floor, now a wall, was solid tongue and groove lumber. Leif stepped inside. He ran his hand along the metal sheathing where it showed through gaps in the wood. Even in August, the iron was cool to the touch. "Not in this," he said. inside this. And there's a difference. What difference? Leif pulled out his grandfather's journal and flipped to a page near the middle. The writing was in Norwegian, dense and cramped, accompanied by diagrams that looked like building plans. He traced one diagram with his finger. My grandfather survived the winter of 1860. His entire village nearly died. The cold was so severe that birds fell frozen from the sky. But my grandfather and his family lived because of something he built, something the others didn't understand. What did he build? A room inside a room. Leif pointed to the diagram. Two walls separated by a gap filled with straw. The outer wall stops the wind. The inner wall holds the heat. The gap between them traps air, and trapped air doesn't conduct cold. It stays still, insulates, protects. Anakin looked at the boxcar. I can build that here. I know I can. Leif can build that here. I know I can. Leif walked deeper into the boxcar, measuring distances with his eyes. This car is 34 feet long and 8 feet wide inside. I don't need to heat all of it. I'll build an inner room at the far end, 16 feet by 7 feet. Half the space, half the wood to heat it. The iron exterior will stop the wind completely. No sod cabin can do that. Wind finds every crack, every gap, but iron is continuous, unbroken. And the cold? Everyone knows metal conducts cold. You'll freeze. Not if there's a gap. Leif pressed his palm against a section of the wall where the wood planking had pulled away from the metal shell. A space of perhaps 4 inches separated the two layers. Feel this. Anakin pressed her hand against the wood. Her eyes widened. It's warmer. Warmer than the metal, yes. The air in that gap isn't moving. It can't carry the cold inward because it's trapped. That's the principle my grandfather used. That's what I'm going to build. For a long moment, Anakin said nothing. She stood in the dim interior of the abandoned boxcar, surrounded by rust and dust and the lingering smell of grain, and she looked at her brother as if seeing him for the first time. Do you really believe this will work? I believe it has to work. Leif put the journal back in his coat. Because the alternative is dying, and I'm not ready to die. Are you? Anakin shook her head slowly. Then help me. I can't do this alone. She was quiet for another moment, and then she nodded. Tell me what to do. The first visitor came 2 weeks later. Halvard Nielsen had worked the Northern Pacific since 1875. He was section foreman for the stretch between Medora and Sentinel Butte, 55 years old with hands like old leather and eyes that had stopped expecting good news sometime around the winter of 1882. He found Leif trying to pry boards from the boxcar's interior with a broken knife. Fenrir rose when Halvard appeared at the rim of the coulee, his growl low and warning. Easy, Leif said, placing a hand on the dog's head. He's railroad. He has a right to check on the wreck. Halvard climbed down into the coulee, his movements careful, his eyes taking in everything. The salvage lumber stacked against one wall, the cottonwood poles leaning in a corner, the girl gathering dry grass near the river. The wolf dog that watched his every move. What are you doing here? Halvard asked. Living. The old Norwegian studied the boxcar, the boy, the broken knife. He did not laugh. Men who had seen what he had seen did not laugh at much anymore. You can't winter here, he said. That car is just a metal box. Might as well sleep in a bucket. Cold goes right through iron. You'll need a proper cabin, 8 cords minimum, a stove, food stores. He shook his head. A boy and a girl alone won't last till Christmas. When they find you in spring, the coyotes will have scattered what's left across the coulee. Leif kept working at the board. It was not coming loose, but he kept working. I can give you a ride to Dickinson, Halvard offered. Church ladies there take strays. It's better than dying. No. Why not? Leif stopped, looked at him. Because I know what they do to girls like my sister, and I'd rather freeze. Halvard was quiet for a long moment. Then he noticed something in Leaf's coat pocket, the corner of a leather journal, worn soft with age. "What's that?" Leaf hesitated, then pulled out the journal. He held it carefully, as if it were something precious. "It belonged to my grandfather, Björn Sundberg. He was a builder in Setesdal. He knew things about surviving winter that people here have forgotten." Halvard's expression changed. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. "Setesdal," he repeated. "My father was from the next valley over. He used to talk about the old ways, the Luftlom, the air pocket. You know about it?" "I know my father tried to tell me about it." Halvard's voice was heavy. "I know I didn't listen." He fell silent. Fenrir had stopped growling, his head tilted as if sensing the change in the man's demeanor. "Show me what you're planning," Halvard said finally. "Show me the journal." Leif showed him. The diagrams, the calculations, the careful notes in cramped Norwegian handwriting. Halvard studied each page in silence, his weathered face unreadable. "It might work," he said at last. "It might not, but it's not as crazy as I thought when I rode down here." He looked at Leif with something that might have been respect. "You'll need tools, a proper axe, nails, a stove." "I know. I have 43 cents." Halvard almost smiled. "Then you'll need more than 43 cents." He turned to leave, then stopped. "There's a stove in the dump pile behind the depot. Sheet iron, cracked firebox. No good for a regular cabin because it leaks smoke. It owe me for the stove." He climbed out of "owe me for the stove." He climbed out of the coulee without looking back. But Anakin had been standing at the rim, close enough to hear, and what she heard next made her blood run cold. Another railroad worker had been waiting with the horses. As Halvard reached the top, the man asked, "What do you think?" "I think that boy's going to kill his sister with his stubbornness," Halvard said. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "I've seen it before. A man gets an idea in his head, won't listen to reason, and everyone around him pays the price. By February, we'll be hauling 2 frozen bodies out of that coulee." Anakin backed away silently, her heart pounding. Or she did not tell Leif what she had heard. But that night, lying awake in the dark boxcar with Fenrir's warm body pressed against her side, she wondered for the first time if her brother's confidence was faith or foolishness. Halvard Nilsson has seen what Dakota winters can do. He has pulled frozen bodies from the snow. He believes these children will die. But he also recognized something in that journal, something from his own past. What happened in 1882 that put that haunted look in his eyes? And will Anakin's doubt grow into something that tears the siblings apart? Stay with us. October came cold and fast. The cottonwoods along the Little Missouri dropped their leaves in a single week, carpeting the ground with yellow. The first frost arrived on the 12th, painting ice crystals on the water bucket Anakin left outside overnight. Leif worked from dawn until dark, every day without exception. The inner walls rose slowly, plank by plank, pole by pole. His hands, which had been soft from a summer of light work, transformed over those weeks. First they blistered, then they bled, then they hardened into something that no longer felt pain the way it once had. Calluses thick as leather formed across his palms. His knuckles swelled and cracked. Fenrir watched it all. He lay in the corner of the boxcar during the day, his yellow eyes following every movement Leif made. When strangers approached the coulee, he would rise and stand between them and Anakin, his growl a warning that needed no translation. At night, he slept between the 2 children, his body heat adding precious warmth to their thin blankets. And Anakin would bury her fingers in his thick fur when the loneliness became too heavy, whispering secrets she could not tell her brother. The wolf dog never complained. He simply kept watch, as he had since the day their father died. Anakin worked beside Leif when she could. She gathered dry grass from the Peterson claim 3 miles south, making 14 trips over 5 days, each trip taking 3 hours. She carried the grass in bundles on her back, stumbling over frozen ground, her arms aching, her lungs burning in the cold air. Each bundle filled maybe 8 feet of the gap between the inner and outer walls. The skeptics came in waves, each one certain that they knew better than the orphan boy with his strange ideas and foreign journal. Cornelius Whitmore arrived in late September, riding a fine bay horse, his expensive coat buttoned against the autumn chill. He sat at the rim of the coulee and looked down at what Leaf had built. The inner walls were half finished. Salvaged lumber and cottonwood poles formed a skeleton inside the iron shell, leaving a gap of 6 inches between the new construction and the old metal exterior. "What in God's name is that?" Whitmore called down. Leaf did not answer. He was fitting another pole into place, his movements steady and precise. Fenrir rose from his corner, watching the stranger. "That boy's building his own coffin," Whitmore announced to no one in particular. "Metal box in a Dakota winter? I give them till Christmas." He laughed, the sound carrying across the coulee. "Tell you what, boy, when you freeze to death, I'll buy whatever's left of your supplies. Consider it charity." He rode away still laughing. Dr. Franklin Mercer came a week later, driven by what he called professional concern. He was a thin man with spectacles and a medical degree from Chicago, and he examined the boxcar with the expression of someone inspecting a particularly troubling diagnosis. "Medically speaking," he said, "this structure will conduct cold directly into your bodies. Iron has one of the highest thermal conductivities of any common building material. You might as well sleep in an icebox." Leaf continued working, not bothering to explain again what he had already explained. Reverend Josiah Crenshaw came next, Bible in hand, concerned for their immortal souls. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," he declared, standing at the edge of the coulee like a prophet surveying Sodom. But he does not help fools. Those pagan Norwegian tricks will not save you. Only faith can do that." Anakin, who had been silent through most of these encounters, finally spoke. "Reverend, the Lord gave us minds to think and hands to build. We're using both. If that's pagan, then I suppose we're pagans." Crenshaw's face darkened. "Pride goeth before a fall, child. So does preparation. I guess we'll see which one matters more come January." The Reverend left without another word. The betting pool started that same week. Silas Braddock, who owned the general store in Medora, posted a board behind his counter with dates ranging from December 15th to February 28th. For 50 cents, anyone could pick the day they thought the Sundberg children would finally freeze to death. He came to the coulee himself one afternoon, riding a mule that looked as skeptical as its owner. "I'm taking bets," Silas announced, pulling a small notebook from his coat. "Christmas or New Year? I've got December 20th myself. Whitmore's already in for $5. Leaf did not look up from his work. "You're not even going to defend yourself?" Silas laughed. "Boy, I've seen homesteaders with cabins and wives and 8 cords of wood stacked to the rafters freeze to death in winters half as bad as what's coming. What makes you think you're different?" "I don't think I'm different," Leaf said quietly. "I just think I'm right." Billy Tanner, a young ranch hand who worked for Whitmore, came by the following day. He was 22, loud and full of the certainty that comes from never having been truly tested. "Orphan boy thinks he's smarter than all of us," Billy called down from the rim. "Wait till real winter comes. That tin can will be your coffin, and I'll be the one who finds what's left of you." Fenrir rose to his feet, growling, "Keep your dog leashed, boy. Next time I see him, I might not be so friendly." The worst was Martha Dahl, the blacksmith's wife. She did not come to the coulee herself. She did not need to. Her words traveled through the town like smoke through cracks. "Poor things," she told her sewing circle, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "That girl deserves better than dying in a tin can because her brother's too proud to ask for help. Someone should ride out there and bring them in before it's too late." Anakin heard about it from Marta Sorensen, who had come to trade flour for washing. "Fort, don't listen to her," Marta said. "Martha Dahl has never survived anything harder than a cold cup of coffee. You're worth 10 of her." But the words stung anyway. And late that night, Anakin asked Leif a question she had been holding for weeks. "What if they're right? What if we do die here?" Leif was quiet for a long moment. Fenrir lifted his head, watching them both. When Leif spoke, his voice was steady. "Then we die free. We die together. And we die knowing we tried." He reached for her hand. "That's more than most people can say." Anakin squeezed back. It was the first time she had done so since Marcus Harlow's visit in August. Not everyone in the territory thought the Sundberg children were fools. Old Ezra Blackwood came to the coulee on a cold afternoon in late October, riding a horse older than most of the homesteaders in the region. He was 71 years old, the oldest man in 3 counties, and he had seen things that younger men had only read about. He did not climb down into the coulee. He simply sat at the rim, watching Leif work, for nearly an hour. Finally he spoke. "Norwegian?" Leif looked up. "My grandfather was. From Setesdal." Ezra nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "I've seen Norwegian barns survive what American barns couldn't. Something about the way they trap air. Something about double walls. You know about it?" "I remember it." Ezra's eyes were distant, looking at something decades in the past. "Winter of '56, before the war. I was working a claim up in Minnesota territory. The Norwegians there built different. Everyone laughed at them. And then the blizzard came, and the Norwegians were the only ones still standing when it was over." He looked down at Leif with something like respect. "Boy might know something," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Boy might know something after all." He rode away without another word, but his visit gave Leif something that all the skeptics had tried to take away: hope that he was not alone in believing. The stove came from Halvard Nielsen, as promised, a sheet iron box stove with a crack running across the firebox like a scar. But when Halvard delivered it, he did not leave immediately. He stood in the doorway of the inner room, his weathered face unreadable, his eyes fixed on something Leif could not see. "My boy was 17 when he died," Halvard said quietly. "His name was Eric. Same sound as yours almost. He had ideas. It's like you. He wanted to build a house the way his grandfather had taught him, back in the old country. Double walls, air gaps, all the things your journal talks about." Leif stopped working. Something in Halvard's voice demanded attention. Fenrir rose from his corner and padded over, sitting at Halvard's feet as if sensing the man's grief. "I told him he was a fool. I told him we were Americans now, and Americans built American houses. I told him to stop filling his head with old country nonsense and build something practical." Halvard's hands, those leather-tough hands that had worked the railroad for 20 years, began to tremble. "He listened to me. He built an American cabin. Good timber, tight joints, everything the experts said to do. And when the blizzard of 1882 came, that American cabin collapsed under the weight of the snow. The roof came down on my wife, my son, and my granddaughter while they slept." He turned to face Leif directly. His eyes were wet. "I found them 3 days later when the storm broke. Eric had tried to shield his mother and daughter with his own body. He was still holding them when I dug them out." The silence in the boxcar was absolute. "I killed my family because I was too proud to listen to a 17-year-old boy," Halvard said. "I will not make that mistake again. Build your shelter, Leif Sundberg. Build it the way your grandfather taught you, and if you need help, you know where to find me." He left without another word. But from that day forward, he came by the coulee every week, bringing tools, advice, and the silent support of a man trying to atone for sins he could never undo. And all 6 people have now told Leif and Anakin that they will die. A rancher, a doctor, a preacher, a shopkeeper, a ranch hand, and a gossip. They have made bets on the children's deaths. They have laughed at their design. But two people believe. Old Ezra Blackwood remembers what the Norwegians knew. And Halvard Nilsson has learned at the cost of everything he loved that sometimes the old ways are the only ways that work. Will it be enough? Stay with us. Marcus Harlow returned on December 10th. He came alone, riding a black horse through the frozen landscape. He stopped at the rim of the coulee and looked down at what Leif had built. The boxcar was transformed. Smoke rose from the stovepipe. A path had been cleared through the snow to the door. Firewood was stacked neatly under a canvas shelter. Marcus stared for a long moment, and then he smiled. He rode down into the coulee and dismounted. Leif met him at the door, Anniken standing behind him, Fenrir growling at their side. "Well," Marcus said, looking around, "I have to admit, I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd make it this long. What do you want?" "The same thing I wanted in August." Marcus's smile did not waver. The girl, the Hendricks boy, is still interested. More interested, actually. His father says a girl who can survive a winter like this would make a strong wife. "She's not for sale." "Everything is for sale, boy. The question is price." Marcus stepped closer, and Fenrir's growl deepened to a snarl. "Listen to me carefully. I owe the Hendricks family money. A lot of money. The kind of money that gets men killed when they don't pay it back. Your sister's my way out. Hand her over, and I'll forgive your father's debt, forget about the homestead, and disappear from your lives forever. There was no debt. That note was forged. Can you prove that?" Leif said nothing. "I didn't think so." Marcus looked past him to Anniken. "Think about it, girl. A warm house, plenty of food, a husband who can provide for you. Is that really worse than freezing to death in a metal box with a brother who isn't even your real blood?" Anniken stepped forward, her chin raised. Fenrir moved with her, positioning himself between her and Marcus. "He is my real blood. He's my brother. And I'd rather die in this box than spend one night under the same roof as anyone you chose for me." Marcus's smile finally faded. Something cold and ugly flickered in his eyes. "Christmas is in 2 weeks," he said, and backing toward his horse as Fenrir continued to advance. "I have $50 riding on you being dead by then. Don't disappoint me." He mounted and rode away. Leif and Anniken stood in silence, watching the empty space where he had been. Fenrir pressed against Anniken's leg, whining softly. "He's not going to stop," Anniken said. "No." "What do we do?" Leif looked at her, his little sister, who had been through so much, who had lost everything and kept going. "We survive," he said. "We survive, and we prove them all wrong." The first real test came on November 5th. The temperature outside had dropped to 14 degrees above zero, the coldest night since they had arrived. Leif lit a fire in the patch stove for the first time, feeding small sticks into the firebox while Anniken watched the smoke. The crack leaked at first, when a thin wisps of smoke curled through the clay patch, filling the room with a haze that made their eyes water. But as the fire built and the clay heated, the leak diminished. Within an hour, the smoke was barely visible, and the temperature inside the room began to climb. Leif had found an old thermometer in the boxcar's debris, cracked but still functional. He hung it on the wall and watched the mercury rise. 32 degrees, 40, 45. After 2 hours, the thermometer read 52 degrees. Outside, it was 14 above zero, a difference of 38 degrees with less than half a cord of wood burned. Leif pressed his hand against the inner wall. Warm. He reached into the gap as far as he could. Cool, but not cold. He pressed his hand against the metal exterior where the canvas hung. Ice cold. Frost already forming. But the frost was on the canvas, not in the room. The moisture was trapped where he had planned to trap it. The cold was held where he had planned to hold it. The design worked. "Leif." Anakin's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's warm." He nodded, unable to speak. Fenrir had crawled closer to the stove, stretching out on the packed earth floor with a contented sigh. For the first time since August, for the first time since Marcus Harlow had taken everything from them, Leif felt something that might have been hope. Christmas came and went. The thermometer read 18 below zero. The room held at 44 degrees. The betting pool in Medora had to be revised. The first 8 days of January were a false thaw. Temperatures climbed to 28 degrees on January 6th. The sun broke through for the first time in weeks. Leif seized the opportunity, cutting wood with a fury he had not known he possessed. He added a quarter cord to his pile. He checked his trap line and found 2 rabbits. Protein he desperately needed. Anakin traded washing for the Sorensen children's outgrown clothes. Extra layers, worn and patched, but warmth they did not have before. By January 8th, they had 2 cords of wood, food stores for 5 weeks, a shelter that was holding a chance. That evening, the sky turned green-gray. The cattle still alive on the open range began moving east, as if pushed by something coming from the west. Fenrir paced restlessly, whining at the door, his yellow eyes fixed on the western horizon. Halvard Nilsson stopped at the coulee on his way to check the line. "If you have anything to do outside," he said, "do it now." "What's coming?" "I've seen it once before, in 1881. Stay inside no matter what you hear, and pray that contraption of yours holds." He looked at the boxcar, at the thread of smoke rising from the stovepipe, at the 2 children and their wolf dog who had survived longer than anyone had expected. "If you make it through this," he said, "I'll stop telling you you're going to die." It was the closest he had come to saying he believed in them. He left. Leif watched him go. The wind was rising. The green-gray sky was spreading from the west like a bruise across the heavens. The night of January 8th brought no rest. Leif checked the stove every 2 hours, adding wood, monitoring the temperature inside. Fenrir paced restlessly, unable to settle. Anakin slept in fits and starts, waking at every gust of wind. By dawn, the false thaw had ended. The temperature had climbed back to 31 degrees, but the sky told a different story. The green-gray wall had spread across the entire western horizon. On the morning of January 9th, 1887, the storm announced its arrival. Leif woke before dawn with a feeling of pressure behind his eyes. The air inside the room felt thick, heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. Beside him, Anakin stirred. At their feet, Fenrir was already awake, his ears pricked forward, a low whine building in his throat. "Something's wrong," Anakin said. "Something's coming." They ate a cold breakfast of dried rabbit meat and hardtack, saving their wood for what lay ahead. Through the gap in the outer door, Leif could see the sky. It was the color of a bruise, green and purple and gray, all mixed together in ways that sky should not be colored. At noon, the temperature had dropped to 18 degrees. At 2 o'clock, the first flakes of snow began to fall. At 3 o'clock, the wind started to rise. At 3:17, the wall hit. There was no gradual transition, no gentle buildup. One moment the wind was strong but manageable. The next moment, something struck the boxcar with the force of a locomotive. The iron shell rang like a bell. The wooden walls inside shuddered. Fenrir howled, a sound that seemed to answer the scream of the wind. Snow began hissing against the exterior, not falling, but driving sideways, propelled by winds that would later be measured at 50 miles per hour. Leif grabbed Anakin's hand and they crouched in the center of the room. Fenrir pressed between them, listening to the storm scream against their shelter. But the walls held. The metal exterior did what it had been built to do. It stopped the wind absolutely. Every gust that would have found a crack in a wooden cabin, every blast that would have driven snow through sod walls. every knife edge of cold that would have cut through conventional construction. All of it broke against the iron and went no further. Inside the wooden room, inside the gap stuffed with straw, the temperature held steady at 46 degrees. Outside, the world was ending. The storm lasted 9 days. January 9th. Temperature outside 0 degrees by midnight, falling. Temperature inside 45 degrees. Wind 50 miles per hour and climbing. Visibility 0. January 10th. Temperature outside minus 40 degrees. Temperature inside 44 degrees. So Leif rationed wood, keeping the fire just hot enough to maintain warmth. January 11th, the worst day so far. Temperature outside minus 46 degrees. Fenrir pressed himself against Anakin's side, his body heat adding precious warmth. When the wind howled loudest, he would lift his head and answer with a howl of his own, as if challenging the storm to come through him first. That night, something pounded on the outer door. Leif froze, his hand on the wood axe. Anakin stared at him with wide eyes. Fenrir's growl rumbled through the small space. The pounding came again. Not wind, not debris. Something deliberate, something human. He opened the inner door, then the outer door, and the cold hit him like a physical blow. Through the driving snow, he could see a shape. A man collapsed in the drift just outside the boxcar. Leif grabbed him by the collar and dragged him inside. Thomas Sorensen was a farmer from 2 miles north. He had gone to check the river for open water and lost his way in the whiteout. He had been stumbling through the snow for hours, guided by nothing but luck and the faint smell of wood smoke from Leif's stovepipe. He was hypothermic. His skin was gray, his lips blue. Both hands were white with frostbite. Leif stripped off the man's frozen coat and wrapped him in every blanket they had. Anakin heated water for willowbark tea, holding the cup to his lips while Leif fed the stove. Fenrir sniffed Thomas once, then settled at his feet, sharing his warmth with the stranger as naturally as he shared it with the children. The room's temperature had dropped to 34 degrees during the time the doors were open. Leif burned more wood than he should have, bringing it back up to 40. Thomas Sorensen opened his eyes just before midnight. "Where am I?" he croaked. "Safe," Leif said. "You're safe." Thomas looked around the small room, at the rough wooden walls, the patched stove, the 2 children, and the wolf dog who had saved his life. "You're the Sundberg kids, the ones in the metal box." "Yes. They said you'd be dead by Christmas." They were wrong. In the darkest hour, when survival meant hoarding every scrap of warmth, Leif and Anakin opened their door to a stranger. They shared their shelter, their fire, their precious wood with a man they had never met. This is what it means to be human. This is what it means to survive, not just with your body, but with your soul. But the storm is not over. The worst is still to come. January 14th. So the 6th day of the storm. Temperature outside minus 46 degrees. Temperature inside 38 degrees and falling. Wood remaining half a cord. 3 people now shared a room designed for 2. Thomas Sorensen had recovered enough to sit up, but his frost-bitten hands were useless for any real work. 2 fingers on his right hand had turned black. The stove failed on the morning of January 14. Leif woke to smoke, not the thin haze he had grown used to. Thick smoke, acrid and choking, filling the inner room. The crack in the firebox had opened again. The clay patch, stressed by 6 days of constant firing, had crumbled away. Smoke was pouring into the room instead of up the stovepipe. He had minutes to fix it, maybe less. Leif pulled the burning wood from the stove with his bare hands, throwing it onto the dirt floor, re-stamping out the flames. The metal of the firebox seared his palms. He scraped the crumbled clay from the crack with his knife, mixed new clay with ash from the fire, working by feel in the thick smoke. "Open the door," Thomas said, coughing. "Let it clear." Open the door and we lose all the heat, 46 below outside. We'd never get the temperature back up. Leif packed the clay into the crack, pressed it firm, held it in place while his lungs burned, and then he collapsed. The smoke inhalation had been worse than he realized. His vision swam. His legs gave out. He hit the floor hard, barely conscious. Anakin was at his side in an instant. Leif! Leif, wake up! But Leif did not wake up. His breathing was shallow, his face pale. The burns on his hands were already beginning to blister. The room was cooling. The fire was out. And the temperature was falling. And Anakin was alone. She did not panic. Later, she would wonder where the calm came from, whether it was something her father had taught her, or something born in the moment, or simply the animal instinct of a creature that refuses to die. But in that moment, with her brother unconscious on the floor and the cold creeping in around them, Anniken Sundberg did not panic. She did what needed to be done. First, the stove. The crack was still leaking, the clay patch incomplete. She finished what Leif had started, packing more clay into the gap, pressing it firm with her smaller hands. And as she worked, she remembered. "My father taught me things," she said slowly, the realization building with each word. "He taught me how to read weather, how to find water, how to start a fire with wet wood, and only teaching Leif. I thought the only teaching Leif. I thought the important knowledge was in that journal, in Norwegian words I couldn't read. I thought I was just extra, the daughter from the second wife, not as important as the son who carried the family name." Tears began to slide down her cheeks, but she did not stop working. But he was teaching me too. Every day, in little ways, he was preparing me for exactly this moment, the day when Leif would fall and I would have to catch him. She pressed the clay into the crack, feeling it seal beneath her fingers. He knew this would happen. Maybe not exactly this, but something like it. He knew Marcus would come for us. He knew we would need each other. That's why he taught us different things. Leif got the building knowledge, the technical skills. I got the survival instincts, the ability to read danger and respond to crisis. She looked at her unconscious brother, at the burns on his hands, at the face that was so much like their father's. He made us into two halves of the same whole. Apart, we might have died. Together, we could survive anything. The fire caught. The room began to warm. And Anniken Sundberg, 15 years old, understood for the first time what her father had truly given her. Leif woke at sunset. His hands throbbed with pain. His throat was raw from smoke inhalation, but he was alive. Anakin was sitting beside him, feeding the stove. Fenrir lay across his legs, refusing to move. "What happened?" he croaked. "You collapsed. Smoke inhalation and burns." Now I fixed the stove and rebuilt the fire. He stared at her, at his 15-year-old sister, who had saved all their lives while he lay unconscious on the floor. "How did you know what to do?" Anakin smiled. It was a tired smile, but a genuine one. "Father taught me. He taught both of us, Leif, not just you. He knew this day would come. He knew we would need each other." Leif closed his eyes. He thought about his father, who had refused to send him away despite his stepmother's wishes, who had kept his grandfather's journal safe for 19 years, who had taught his son to build and his daughter to survive, who had prepared them for exactly this moment, even though he could not have known it would come. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're my brother," Anakin said simply. "What else would I do?" The storm broke on January 15th. Leif woke to silence. After 9 days of constant wind, constant roar, constant screaming pressure against the iron shell, there was only silence. He opened his eyes. Pale light filtered through gaps in the outer door. Not the gray light of storm clouds, but something brighter, something cleaner. Sunlight. They opened the doors together, pushing against the snow that had drifted against them during the night. The world outside was transformed. Snow had drifted to 8 feet against the south side of the boxcar, bearing the lower half of the structure entirely. The cottonwoods along the river were bent and broken. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue. The temperature was 22 degrees below zero. It felt warm. After 46 below, 22 below felt like spring. Leaf stepped out of the boxcar for the first time in 9 days. Fenrir bounded ahead, leaping through the drifts, his gray coat nearly invisible against the snow. They were alive. They were all alive. The aftermath came in waves. First, the counting, 7 dead in the Medora area alone. A rancher found frozen in his own barn. A traveling salesman discovered in a ravine near Sentinel Butte. 5 others, names that Leaf did not know. 90% of the cattle on the northern ranges were dead. The open-range cattle industry, which had built the region, was finished. And against this backdrop of death and ruin, word began to spread about the children in the iron box. Marcus Harlow returned in February. The snow had settled by then, packed down by wind and sun into a hard crust that could support a horse's weight. Marcus rode into the coulee on a gray morning, expecting to find corpses. Instead, he found smoke rising from the stovepipe. A path cleared to the door. 2 children, a wolf dog, and a recovered farmer waiting for him. Fenrir's hackles rose. His growl was low and deadly. "Still alive," Marcus said, dismounting. "I have to admit, I'm disappointed." "You lost," Leaf said flatly. "So I did." Marcus looked around the coulee. "But I'm a patient man. Winter isn't over yet. There are many ways for 2 orphans to die out here." "Not as many as you think." A new voice. Marcus turned. Thomas Sorensen stood at the rim of the coulee, leaning on a walking stick. His right hand was bandaged where 2 fingers had been amputated. Behind him stood his wife Marta, and behind her, climbing up from the other direction, came Halvard Nielsen, Cornelius Whitmore, and old Ezra Blackwood. Marcus looked from face to face, reading the expressions he saw there. Anger, determination, unity. "What is this?" he asked. Thomas walked down into the coulee. "This is justice, Harlow. I know what you did. I know about the forged note. I know about the debt you owe the Hendricks family. I know you tried to sell that girl to pay it off." Marcus's face went pale. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Cornelius Whitmore descended from the rim. "Because I happen to know the Hendricks family. I happen to know their son was expecting a bride this winter. A girl from a homestead claim east of here, delivered by her uncle in exchange for certain financial considerations. You can't prove anything." "Maybe not in a court of law," Halvard Nielsen said. "But we don't need a court. We have something better. We have a community." He reached the bottom of the coulee and stood next to Leif. This boy and his sister survived something that killed grown men with cabins and wood stores and years of experience. They did it with 43 cents and a book their grandfather wrote. And when a stranger came to their door in the middle of the worst night, they took him in. They shared their fire and their food with a man they had never met. Halvard's voice hardened. "You tried to destroy them. You forged a note to steal their home. You tried to sell their sister like livestock. You bet money on their deaths." "Leave," Thomas said. "Leave this territory and don't come back. Every rancher, every farmer, every merchant from here to Bismarck will know your name and your crimes." "And if I don't leave," Cornelius Whitmore stepped forward, the man who had bet $5 that these children would die before Christmas, the man who had laughed at their design and called their shelter a coffin. "I was wrong about them," Whitmore said quietly. "I was wrong about everything. They built something that saved lives while the rest of us were too proud to listen. If you don't leave this territory by sundown, I will personally make sure you regret it." Marcus looked around one last time, at the children he had tried to destroy, at the community that had rallied around them, at the wolf dog that watched his every move with hungry yellow eyes. He climbed back on his horse. "This isn't over," he said. Yes, it is, Anakin replied. You just don't know it yet. Marcus rode away without looking back. He would be seen one more time, passing through Dickinson on his way east, and then he would disappear from the territory entirely. No one ever knew for certain what became of him. No one particularly cared. Pause for reflection. The community that mocked these children now stands with them. The man who tried to destroy them has been driven out. In the face of disaster, the best of human nature has emerged. But the story is not over. What legacy will Leif and Anakin leave behind? Stay with us for the final chapter. Spring came late that year, as it always did after bad winters. The snow did not fully melt until mid-April, and the rivers ran high with the runoff. But the Sundberg children survived. They had survived the worst winter in 50 years, and they would survive whatever came next. By May, 11 families had begun adopting the double shell design that Leif had built, where Halvard Nilsson recommended the technique to every stranded traveler and impoverished homesteader he encountered. The Northern Pacific Railroad quietly stopped scrapping derelict cars in the region. They had recognized what Leif had proven, that a metal shell, properly used, could save lives. Leif filed a homestead claim on the coulee that summer. A boy who had survived that winter with nothing but ingenuity and determination was a head of household by any measure that mattered. Anakin worked alongside him, as she had from the beginning. They built a proper cabin around the original boxcar, using the iron shell as one wall and the inner room as a root cellar. In 1889, Leif married Sarah Garrett, a rancher's daughter who had watched him build throughout that terrible autumn and never once doubted that he would succeed. They had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, all of whom learned their grandfather's techniques from the journal that had saved their father's life. Anakin married in 1892 a teacher from Bismarck named William Hayes. They settled near the Sundberg homestead, close enough to visit, far enough to have their own lives. Halvard Nilsson retired from the railroad in 1895 and spent his remaining years documenting the traditional building techniques of Norwegian immigrants to the Northern Plains. Cornelius Whitmore never again bet against anyone. He became one of the strongest advocates for newcomers to the territory. He lived until 1912 and was buried with full honors in the Medora Cemetery. Fenrir, the wolf dog who had survived the blizzard at Anakin's feet, lived to be 14 years old. He died in the summer of 1897, peacefully, sure in his sleep, and was buried near the boxcar where he had kept watch for so many years. His grave marker read simply, Fenrir, he kept watch. Leif Sundberg died on September 14, 1941, at the age of 74. He died in the same room where he had survived the terrible winter, the room he had built with his own hands from salvaged lumber and cottonwood poles. The iron shell of the boxcar was still visible in one wall. His children and grandchildren gathered around his bed in those final hours. He had stories for all of them. Memories of his father, his grandfather, his sister. His last words were to his eldest grandson, a boy of 17 who reminded him of himself at that age. Remember, he whispered, some walls are built to keep things out, but the best walls are built to keep things in. Warmth, family, hope. It's killed its founders. But the boxcar has killed its founders. But the boxcar is still there. The iron shell, rusted now but intact, still stands in the coulee 3 miles west of Medora, a testament to the children who saw possibility where others saw only death. In 1978, researchers from North Dakota State University visited the site. They measured the remaining structure, studied the design principles, and compared them to modern passive house architecture. Their conclusion was remarkable. The technique that Leif Sundberg had learned from his grandfather's journal was virtually identical to the cutting-edge, energy-efficient building methods being developed in Europe nearly a century later. The old ways had been right all along. On January 9, 1887, The temperature in Dakota Territory dropped 46 degrees in 7 hours. Cornelius Whitmore, who had lived there for 23 years, said that 2 orphan children would not survive until Christmas. He was wrong. Leif and Anniken Sundberg survived because they trusted in knowledge that others had forgotten, because they refused to give up when everyone told them it was hopeless, because they chose to help a stranger even when it meant risking their own lives. Some walls are built to keep things out. Theirs was built to keep everything in: warmth, hope, family, love. And 100 years later, that wall is still standing. If this story has touched your heart, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible and that hope endures and that the old ways sometimes know best. Until next time, stay warm, stay safe, and never let anyone tell you what you cannot do